was weird for the present to be a time warp, but it felt like a whole other world in there. And you had gamers who were way into Nintendo. You had gamers who were way into, particularly the Super Nintendo, which had a lot of juice at the time, because it was fresh. Nintendo joined the 16-bit party in Russia very late, or in Moscow, very late, because Sega stuff was pirated, and it was just kind of taken for granted. So by the time the Super Nintendo rolled around, it had gained, through Dendy and pirated software, a lot of attention. Nintendo had gained a lot of attention through its NES software library. And the Super Nintendo hit pretty hard, though its games were extremely expensive compared to the Sega Genesis. And that was a time when, Yeltsin was in control of things, and it was pretty much the beginning of modern democracy in Russia. Now, I've heard they've kind of stepped back a little bit. They're a country that has roots, and they look at that seriously. And so they've kind of reverted in a lot of, in terms of the Western, the American perspective of progression. But, so anyway, at the time I saw the 3DO running at this shop, and I was like, wow, look at that. Now, I was sort of impressed because it looked good. Now, keep in mind, at the time, it was a major deal if the original Doom made it to your console. The Nintendo version of Doom was such a big deal and so hyped that it came with a blood red cartridge. What's wild is Nintendo was famous for dumbing down, or not dumbing down, diluting the graphic nature of some of their more mature games. They did have mature games, but they kind of diluted it. Doom came off pretty well, but it had a chuggy frame rate and wasn't a particularly hot game, but it was a hot property. And so the 3DO also featured Doom and Wolfenstein 3D, and the 3DO really was the first time gamers were given access to 3D-ish gameplay. The first-person shooter, really, if you look back, the first-person shooter came to consoles first with the 3DO. I'm not saying the shooters were fantastic, but I will say that for consoles, the best version of Wolfenstein 3D is on the 3DO. I've heard the Jaguar version's okay, but I've honestly never... I've seen it run. I don't know. The 3DO version is fantastic. Escape from Monster Manor, Escape from Ghost Manor, I forgot what it's called. What's interesting about the 3DO, and this is in terms of, I've given you a sense of the cultural, the personal cultural standing of the machine, but one thing in terms of video games that's interesting to notice is that it was trying, with Trip Hawkins, the guy over at EA, who was a major component, I think he was a co-founder of EA, he used to work at Apple too, even before that. He actually left Electronic Arts to the huge mega publisher at the time, and certainly a huge mega publisher now. He left to start the 3DO company, and his goal with this machine is to standardize video gaming across the board. No longer, his idea was no longer to have one machine that ran a certain group of software and another that ran a whole other set of software. Which makes some sense because there was a lot of overlap in software, as you'll see now. Look at your Xbox 360 and PS3 software library. You're going to see a lot of software overlap. So his idea is not ridiculous in the sense that it kind of answers to the redundancy in our current industry. But it's ridiculous, I think, to think that we're all going to be on the same page and nod yes to a single provider. It's just not going to happen. Anyway, it's interesting because he didn't even with the 3DO have Panasonic exclusively publish it. He actually believed so much in the wide scope, the scale of what it could provide to gamers and manufacturers that he actually basically licensed the technology and then had different manufacturers, produce the machines. That's why I say Gold Star, Matsushita, and I think Samsung had a hand in producing the 3DO, their own models. Fascinating stuff. So in terms of video games, it was a weird time where we were just thinking in totally other ways. Now, mind you, very few people really bought the 3DO. It was released for $700 and was seen as kind of... it was trying to be what the Xbox new experience is trying to be now. The new Xbox experience, which is trying to basically be the hub of your living room. Now, mind you, video games consoles, and specifically video games manufacturers, or console manufacturers, have wanted the video game console, their video game console, to be the #1 family unit in the house. You know, the idea is that it controls your living room. And people have had this idea for a very long time, and Microsoft is digging that idea back up with its new Xbox experience for the 360, although they will have a better shot than certainly the 3DO. The 3DO also ushered in, as well as really the first-person shooter, the decent first-person shooter, though Doom for the machine was horrendous. It had some decent first-person shooters. It also ushered in the sense that you could do edutainment and sell it. That is to say, software that had an educational value. You know, it was trying to sell the machine to parents in the ways that a lot of microcomputers, or just computers, personal computers, at the time were also sold to parents as sort of fun alternatives to video games. So the 3DO featured both real games and also entertainment that was educating, you know, kids and parents and grandparents and the family at large. And so you found a lot of weird almanacs. I have a 3D atlas that EA published. That's another very interesting thing about the 3DO. It had crazy support from EA. I mean, EA was the primary supporter of this console. It was because Trip Hawkins really tried to get people, or tried to get electronics help on it. You know, he helped found the company, and he was looking for help, and he got it. He got a ton of help. So Road Rash for the 3DO is one of the greatest games out there. EA published that. Code Monkeys, I think, actually developed it, but which is worth saying because that's a fantastic game, the best version of Road Rash out there, a series that really deserves its comeuppance. But yeah, the 3DO had some of the most ridiculous software out there, what is now considered ridiculous software, but at the time was cutting edge more in terms of ideology than actual gameplay.